I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry, Joe, it's my fault on the PDF. Oh, roll call first. Ready for roll call? Commissioner Andrew? Here. Commissioner French? Here. Commissioner Garrison?
Here.
Commissioner Kalani?
Here.
Commissioner McNeil? All present.
Okay. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Andrew? Yes. Commissioner French? Yes. Commissioner Garrison?
Yes.
Commissioner Kalani?
Yes.
Commissioner McNeil?
Yeah.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Action item.
Okay. I move the board approve water system master plan for Clackamas River Waters North and South Water Systems as completed and dated April 2019.
Second.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Happy to present this item to you tonight. The master plan, water system master plan is finally completed. I'll take you through a little bit of this will be repeat, so bear with me and we'll get through it. Just wanted to kind of recap where we come from and where we're at today. So without further ado, you all should have the presentation. I also attached the figures that are in the presentation at the very back, large version. So tonight we'll talk just again in general about the water system master plan, the chronology of it, some kind of key milestone points that you may recall through the process the last couple of years, the purpose behind the water system master plan, what elements and criteria were involved in developing the plan, and then the results of the analysis and recommendations that were made through the plan, and then wrap it up. So another chronology, these are again milestone dates that are picked out of a multitude of the last couple of years of work that we put into this. In October, well, I'll go back even farther, earlier in 2017, we of course awarded or solicited for and awarded the master plan contract to Carollo Engineers, and then proceeded with the process of gathering data and moving forward with the plan. So by October of 2017, we had reviewed the planning criteria with the board. March of 2018, 6 months later, we had gone through again with the board the status that we've did a couple of status updates as part of this plan, as you know, and went through the planning criteria, where Order Health Authority was in with the requirements behind the plan. I'll talk a little bit about that in detail in a bit. Talked about what is our existing system, what does it look like, what are the components of distribution, storage, pumping, key elements of the system. And then talked, of course, about our demands, both current and futures, based on a couple of different projection factors. And then in July of that same year, we talked a little bit in more detail as we were developing the capital improvement plan component of the system plan. So Chapter 8, we call that. Talked about replacement criteria for facilities, remaining useful life analysis with element, and then other concepts for the development, again, of the CFD program that goes along with the plan. Then in October, just this last October, we presented the draft final plan to you with Carollo Engineers, and Bob George was on board then as well as a post-retirement consultant. And then bringing us up to 2019, January of this year, we received approval letters, or review letters, I should say, from the Oregon Health Authority, for both plans. And no substantial comments in those letters, which was very encouraging. February, I gave you a brief update on where we were at with bringing all last bits and pieces into the plan to consider a final, and working with the consultant, working with Corona to come up with a complete final plan, which I am presenting to you tonight. And then, of course, future is all about implementation. So you've heard all this before. Again, a lot of this is taken straight out of the plans. We had provided the digital links to the completed plans on the website, and again, that will be posted once the board approves that. It will be posted on the website for public. OAR 333, etc. 061, I should say the whole thing since the attorney's in the house. 061 0060 Part 5 identifies the required master plan elements. The district had their master plans in 1998 and 2005. 98 was a full-blown plan. 2005 was also a plan, but considered an update at that time. And then to note that the state, since we're still considered two separate systems, north and south, the state is still requiring two plans, which is why you have the north and south documents. When we do it, the next plan, we are pretty confident that we will be doing one plan based on the fact that the backbone system will be complete, connecting north and south. Just a snapshot again right out of the summary or the table of contents, of each plan. That's common, those are common chapters to each plan, north and south. I think the executive summary, I think as you've read, is pretty helpful. I thought it did a pretty good job in 40 some odd pages to really summarize the bulk of the information, of course in summary form, but providing a good snapshot of all the detail of the plans. And of course getting into the details for each north and south district. So why do we need the plan? Again, these are bullets that I provided in the agenda write-up, and comes right out of the introduction page of both chapter ones in each plans. These are good points to remember as we work through, implementing the plan, and then in the future why we have this plan in front of us. This is what the plan did. It considered past studies, recommendations, or agreements, and other data, concerning the water system. So, as you know, the huge part of the initial thrust and initial effort with the plans was data provision, collecting and providing our data to the consultants so they can work through, get to know our system, get to know the treatment facility, get to know distribution, storage, a lot of plans and as-built, drawings, reports, a whole enormous amount of data that was compiled over a series of months to the consultants so that they could start working through it. And through that, developed an inventory of our infrastructure, existing water system. Looked at this data and developed demographic and demand analysis and looked at future demands within our service areas. And then verified also that our existing policies and criteria found in our rules and regulations and elsewhere, and how we apply those, that those all meet OHA requirements and standards. So the analysis that the plans completed did verify that. Also looked at current and future water resources to identify water supply improvements or deficiencies. Of course, we know our one main source is the river. Also evaluated our existing distribution system using an updated hydraulic model, and something I'll note there is that the big effort or a part of this field work that went into the plan development was gathering some actual real-time field data. So the consultant went out for a period of a couple of weeks and had pressure trackers, demand trackers on points in the system, And from that, we were able to develop a diurnal curves for the hydraulic model to truly create a stronger calibrated hydraulic model. And that again helps us develop improvements to identify deficiencies. And then the seismic component, as you know, the Oregon Resilience Plan, you're familiar with. We evaluated the system in Chapter 7, again for both north and south, based on the ORP, based on those target recovery periods for critical facilities like water. And then out of all of that comes, again, recommendations for improvements. How do we look at our existing deficiencies? We know there's a long list. We know there's a lot of things we could do. Categorize all of those into various improvement, CIP improvement categories, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a couple of slides. And then look at those again from a very high level, planning level cost estimates in order to conduct short and long-term improvements. Okay, so policies and criteria. These are, again, I didn't get into the details on this. This is meant to be a summary, but we know that we looked at, again, service area policies, supply policies, the planning criteria for system analysis. I mentioned seismic. I mentioned the updates we did to the hydraulic model. Based on that information, the tab on the right, or the right side of this slide, is really focusing on the system analysis planning criteria. So when we look at our system and we evaluate needs or the weak points, so to speak, we have base criteria that help us set what the standards are going to be to design to. And that, again, is shown there. So we have criteria involving pressure, where we're shooting for minimum pressure that we're trying to provide, or pressure range we're trying to provide. State requires 20 psi at max day in fire flow. So we also know that we have a goal, a pressure goal of not serving any one area under standard conditions over 150 psi. So we do try to design towards system improvements that keep us within a pressure range. Velocity is another piece of that. So for a pipe with a certain diameter, a certain length, we're focusing on how quickly should the water be flowing through the pipe. So too fast, and that's hard on your pipes. So we design, or we have a planning criteria that says for a pipe size less than 12 inch, we're looking at velocity no quicker than 10 feet per second. For pipes larger, 5 feet per second. And then we've got some criteria for head loss, as well as fire flow. So fire flows, as we know, do vary based on where in the system we are and what type of connection or what type of connection we're talking about. So we know that for single-family residential, we're down in the 1,000 gallons per minute range, whereas for a heavy north industrial customer, you're higher, you're much higher, you're on the 5,000 GPM. Some of the schools on the south side, those are kind of the midpoint where you're in the 3,000 or so, 3,500, 3,250 gallons per minute fire flow ranges. And those are again based on national standards for fire flow. So what are the assumptions that we're working into this 20-year plan? Again, it's a period from essentially today on to the 20-year horizon. We know things will change over time. The crystal ball doesn't really tell us how much exactly, but we can utilize some assumptions, and this is part of that. So for the planning year 2019, the current period, we know that we're wholesaling about 4 million gallons per day to various customers, wholesale customers, and then the phase one backbone, we're assuming will be complete on the end of this year. So that's your 2019 window. 10 years from now, we know, or we project, I should say, we don't know, that we're going to be wholesaling 10 million gallons. So we'll see an increase in wholesale based on primarily the Sunrise water plans of expansion. And we know that phase 1 and 2 of the backbone will be complete. 10 years from there, the conditions don't change a whole lot, the assumptions are the same as 2028. Okay, so what I did here in the next couple slides is I really wanted to just draw out a couple of the example maps. Again, these should be fairly familiar. You've seen these before. They did not change a whole lot from the draft that you were presented with in October. This is just an example of under specific conditions. In this case, it's the 2038 year, the north side. What do our fire flows look like for our maximum day demand? So you can see a lot of green dots. That's good.
Okay.
That means at those points in the system, the existing infrastructure, pipes essentially, are able to provide the required fire flow. The red dots are not so good. Of course, yellow and orange, or I should say red is the not so good, and then the red is bad. Where we're looking at those as we're still providing fire flow at those locations, a certain degree of fire flow, but it's only a percentage of what would be required. So the fire flow that I shared with you earlier, again, we're serving a range of fire flows based on the customer type. This is saying that under specific conditions, in 2038, the design period, those areas, those points or nodes in the system would if those pipes stay unchanged, we would not be able to provide the required fire flow. Still can provide a fire flow, but not the standard amount.
So what happens if there's a fire and it's got a red dot? Do they go to one of the other connections to get water?
That's always a possibility. Not necessarily always happen. A lot of that is coordination, close coordination with the fire department, which we do. We continue to communicate with them. Areas in the system where we have low flows or low fire flows. The south side is a great example of that. Redland area, they're very aware of the limitations on the system, and of course some areas in the north as well.
Did you coordinate with them on the San McGee fire?
That was the recent one out in.
San McGee Drive.
I'm trying to recall where that was at. Redland area, out of district, I believe.
It was in district.
It was in district. Okay. There was another one recently that was out.
Yeah, that was the barn fire.
Yeah. Yeah, we did.
On San McGee,
Mhm.
used a hell of a lot of water.
They did.
Used a
Yep.
hell of a lot of water,
Yep.
all by tenders.
Yeah.
Because there is no fire flow out of San McGee Drive.
Yeah, another recent one was on the, over off of 213, not Cloudview,
Yeah.
that area.
San McGee went stressed our system hard. They tried to sucker, tried to dry. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, again, it's
We need to get people up there. That's all there is to it.
it's a close coordination that's required.
Because I never heard a call from you guys, ever.
Pardon?
I never heard them make a call from you guys, ever.
Oh.
Never, ever, on the San McGee. That was a huge llama farm.
Mhm.
160 by 210 foot building gone. Yeah. I was just wondering if they ever called you.
Yeah. Okay, the next figure again is an example of similar to the fire flow. We've got some color coding here where this map is looking specifically at issues with velocity and or head loss for that same time period. So we're going to look at the north system, and this is the 2038 maximum day, or I should say peak hourly conditions. So you can see the lines that shouldn't be a surprise, where we're seeing some red. We know that we have limitations there, certainly in this time period, 20-year time period, where, again, based on those demands over that period of growth in the next 20 years, we would see issues with those lines staying under that, or within that velocity, maximum velocity component. So for both fire flow and velocity and head loss, those are all typically restricted by your diameter of pipe, right? So that's a good rule of thumb where if we're seeing an issue out there, we know at some point in time those are required upgrade. So a common key. Okay, so Water system master plan identifies a capital improvement plan. It breaks up the projects into short-term and long-term. If you recall, this is chapter 8 in the plans, both plans. The short-term is a 10-year window from 19 to 28, and long-term is 29 to 2038. Short-term is, some of that is already underway. Backbone phase 1 is an example of that, although in reality, this plan assumes that the backbone phase 1 is complete. So the design, demand calculations are based on phase 1 being done. But phase 2, and then any other high priority repair and replacement type projects, kind of low-hanging fruit is a good way to think of short-term. Long-term, we're looking again at a range of types of projects, improving fire flows, which we just talked about, improving other capacity improvements, and then lines that are past their useful life that require repair or frequent repair or just straight up replacement. The 10-inch out here on 8 seconds is a good example. It's a 1927 lead joint cast iron pipe. So. Here's an example from the south side of our CIP specific project phase CIP, and there's a number of maps in the CIP chapter 8. This is just one that I felt was fairly clear. You can see that each project is identified by a number, a letter, a number. The letter has a significance, and then the number is just the number that project is in that series. So D is a distribution-based CIP, and again, I'll talk about what these types are on the next slide, I think. You got a couple of backbone ones in here. Again, you've seen the phase 2 backbone work, Brazel Road, Beaver Lake Pump Station, Bradley, Beaver Creek Reservoir on there. Just a good, I should say, easy picture. Speaks a lot towards the degree of CIP. So you've got, again, color coding that denotes long-term and short-term on this map. So in this, the orange, I think that's orange, yellow, is long-term, and then the red is the short-term. So kind of a degree of criticality associated by the color type. Okay, we're getting down to the home stretch, I think. The plan does a good job of defining what CIP project categories we were looking at as a total, but I felt it would be beneficial to have a summary of those on one slide. So for both the north and the south, these categories hold true. General projects are those really that involve planning, so our water treatment plant facility plan, master plan is a good example of that, which we're about to undertake. Other seismic, resiliency planning, or when the time comes that we do a new master plan, a new distribution system master plan, like this one, those are all general type projects. Programmatic projects are those that address repair and replacement. Again, that could be based on useful life, exceeding useful life, or just lines that have, for whatever reason, are seen a lot of repair. Also seismic projects, so beefing up a seismic, I don't want to say backbone because we've patented that name, but seismic type projects, resiliency projects. Backbone projects are specific to the backbone phase 2. Distribution system projects are those that would address, like the maps showed us a little bit ago, areas of projected low pressure, high velocity, or those that are going to increase diameter of pipes for fire flow. Pressure zone improvements, there's just a couple of those in the plan. I think one each, north and south. So there were proposals in there for recommendations in there to improve the Kirkwood pressure zone on the north side, which is a very small pressure zone, and then expanding the Beaver Creek pressure zone for an area that we have just north of the Beaver Creek Reservoirs, kind of overlooking the valley of the Beaver Lake area, where we have very low pressures because those customers are drawing off of the Beaver Creek Reservoirs, so it's a very low pressure area. Pump station improvements, again looking at capacity of pump stations. That number is actually fairly small for what we have in the plan due to mainly the fact that we're making significant improvements to the south pumping and kind of revamping or reorienting how we pump water in the south with the backbone projects. And then some condition analysis work for the pump stations. So some of those pump stations are at their useful life, or at a period in their life, I should say, when they need to be reevaluated. The electrical work that we're doing right now is part of that. But there's also structural, mechanical, and plumbing improvements. And then storage projects. So a nice thing to note is that once we complete the backbone phase 2 work, our storage envelope for the whole district is looking pretty good. So these projects really focus on not necessarily building new tanks as much as evaluating condition. Do we need to go in and renovate like we're doing at Redland Reservoir #2 right now? Or other improvements that we may need to make to reservoir sites. One area there is adding seismic valves that can control when a seismic event occurs. You don't end up with a catastrophic loss of water through a ruptured main. You have a valve that shuts and preserves the water in the tank so you can restore the system. So those are the types of improvements that we may be looking at as for the storage component. Okay, big picture. You have these charts again in the plans. They come right out of chapter 8 in both plans. It's a good picture of the whole. The story is right there. We have, under all these categories, significant costs identified. Again, these are high-level, class 4, planning level estimates for these projects. But it does give us an order of magnitude. When we look at the north, across the board, the total about 160 million. Again, it's a 20-year window. So you look at the south, it's a little higher than that, and the costs are distributed differently between the north and the south based on age of the system, the type of facilities that we have differently between the north and the south.
Those are today's figures, not.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, with, again, that high-level planning estimate, which Carollo went through a few presentations ago. I'm trying to recall what that was when we talked to you about that degree of estimating. These were more in the ballpark of about 60 to 75% contingency on most of these projects. Just a lot of unknowns, a lot of time that's going to elapse. And of course, this is a planning document. We get to implementation stages, and every 2 years when we redo the budget, and we come to you with a recommended CIP plan for that year, those estimates will be revamped for those specific projects.
So we'll use $3 million a year for CIP?
Currently?
Yeah. Is that the number we can shoot?
Yeah, we're about 2 is kind of the number. We've been, for the biennium, we've been around 3.5,
Yeah.
3.6. I think this current, for the budget that you're going to vote to approve at the June meeting is 3.7 million.
It's been averaging about 3.
Yeah, our run rate,
We look
is,
3 years, 4 years.
yeah,
You won't stay ahead of inflation.
it's a big number.
Yeah, you won't stay ahead of
It's a big
inflation.
number.
Not even close.
Yep. So, which leads me to kind of a conclusion point. I think the next slide is conclusion, but really our job, as a district, staff and board is to look at this plan, obviously implementing it over the course of the next 20 years has its challenges. But I want to conclude with saying that it is a 20-year window of recommended projects. These are based on, again, high-level estimates. Really how we decide to fund these projects will change over time, or will, not necessarily be the same 5 years from now as it is 15. We'll also look at priority projects, and there will be projects that will come along that we don't have in this plan, things that were unforeseen. These projects are all based on, again, design criteria and assumptions that we've worked in, the best information available today to move us forward. But there will be things, a good example is external input. You know, we have road agencies or other entities, you know, that stipulate things that require change in our system that we don't have to deal with. So we've got our work cut out for us. But,
I had a
yes.
question. Did OHA have any requirement, any changes that they wanted you to make, or did they just accept it as you presented it?
They accepted it. The informal comments that I received were typographical
Okay.
in nature, errors, and corrected those. Their statement in their letters says that the plan meets all OHA requirements,
Okay.
so we're happy to put it forward.
Did they send any money?
Pardon?
Did they send any money?
Oh, I meant to tell you.
There are grants.
I was seeing the humor there, so I apologize.
They usually don't, but
Yeah.
maybe.
Well, it'll be interesting, you know, with the fact that, you know, the feds with the AWIA Infrastructure Improvements Act, and there are things coming down that we don't know how those are going to be administered, if we're going to have access to them, but there are possibilities, and certainly those are things that the board should consider to move forward in funding. I think I covered all those talking points. Oh, yeah, question.
You mentioned seismic protection for the reservoirs. In the event of a seismic event, that they would keep them from draining. In the event of line rupture, would they do the same?
Yes, so if there were a line rupture that was causing a severe draw on the reservoir, that would trigger, the seismic activity would trigger that valve to close.
And those valves or that protection is built into all the reservoirs we're constructing
Yes.
in the backbone project?
Correct, yeah, so both one.
So you just have to refit existing reservoirs?
That's true. I
Going
will
back
say-
how far?
I will say that it probably won't apply to all of our reservoirs. A good example is the Redlands site, where we have the 2 reservoirs now, right? We've got the new one we just built, which does have a seismic actuator valve. Reservoir 2, the old one, we opted not to put one in on. And the basis of that was that really for emergency storage for that zone, we don't need, we don't need both systems, or both reservoirs rather, in a situation where a valve is closing. So there are design decisions that are made where if you have multiple storage points in the system, that it may make sense just to have one or both, and that's just one example, but I didn't want a blanket statement that said, all reservoirs absolutely would require these valves. That's something that we probably go through evaluating as part of a vulnerability assessment. That was definitely outside of the scope of this effort.
Okay, thank you.
But certainly something to consider as we move forward.
Thank you.
I did want to throw in the plan. We coordinated with Clackamas Fire, District Number 1, and we received a letter of support from them regarding the master plan, so that was also encouraging.
A question for council. Bob, have you read this?
The entire plan?
Yes.
No, I have not.
Haven't been involved in 2 lawsuits around fire flow. Does approving this planning document bind this board or future boards to any of the fire flow requirements?
Approving the plan does not bind the board to doing that. Having the plan, I think, is actually a good thing.
I agree.
Because it demonstrates that the district has undertaken the task of identifying where the
Due
needs
diligence,
are.
yeah.
And then we'll set about over 20 years trying to address that. I imagine the concern that you might be feeling and other board members might have is what's the exposure for having these areas where the fire flow isn't what we would like it to be. I think the fact is that if there were a fire and there was a loss and somebody tried to attribute it to the lack of pressure in their area, there's risk. But there's also a fair amount of law that protects the district in those circumstances if you've done these sorts of things to be planning to address them and putting resources toward them as you're able. If the district doesn't have the resources available to it, then
So that still applies for
there's
us.
still some protection, yes.
I mean, it is for transportation.
Sure.
Other
And
things, right?
and in the end, this is also why you have insurance, because there's always this risk.
In both of the cases, the insurance paid for the district. So the fire district was not, the fire district didn't get harmed at all. It all came back on the water district.
Right. And, you know, what you're doing here in coordinating with the fire district, I think is really important. You know, that prevents the fire district from saying, well, we didn't know that there was a pressure issue in that area. You've put them on notice of that so that they can be building plans around that.
Which was my question.
Yeah.
That just doesn't seem to happen. I mean, where the fire district, so what's happened over the years is the water districts and the fire department used to be just like this. I mean, they were like one and the same. They like hung out together. They knew who was, all of that kind of stuff. That's gone today. Not so much because of the water district, but because the way the fire service has changed. And so like San Gee fire, the idiots go up there, there's no freaking water hydrants up there. Anybody that had been around for years know, we better call the water tenders and get them on the road. We're gonna need a lot of water tenders. It took them almost an hour to figure that out. You know, and so that's why I'm concerned about whether this binds the district in any way when we make these kind of presentations and things to make sure that future boards, you know, aren't hung because we've, you know, said we're gonna try to meet this goal and stuff, and when we never put any money towards that, are we responsible for that?
No, by adopting the plan, it's not creating more liability, it's actually benefiting the board and the district.
Good, thank you. I guess my last question is, and but it's, so these plans never come with any kind of how you pay for it. No, there's never a bullet for how you pay for it, never ever. You know, and I just am concerned because we have a treatment plant that's gonna need the same kind of process to come up with another chunk of money, you know, to do that. And I think communicating with ratepayers early, often, is important, you know, about what the needs are. Because nobody's gonna read this, nobody's gonna ever do this, and so. Yeah, I know, you do, and I'm glad we do, but the ratepayers don't. The
No.
ratepayers don't have any idea what kind of nut we're up against with those kind of needs.
Yeah,
you
you're
know.
absolutely right.
I mean, the district doesn't even have the wherewithal to bond them. You know, we just don't have enough assets to do that, and so I don't know what, I think it's gonna take a change in how it's paid for regionally to fix that. I don't know how else to do it. I mean, I was at a meeting for the big pipe project that is coming out of the Willamette River. They're already over budget. I mean, it's just growing.
Yeah, you got $1 billion budget, it's,
Yeah, you know, we're at 2.1 billion, and now they've already pumped in another 200 million, you know, they're going, oh my God. You know, and so you see this kind of stuff, that's why the 3 million a year is gonna buy any for CIP. It's not, you can touch this. I mean, it's a good shot, gotta do something.
right.
But the reality is, we're falling farther and farther behind every year. So it's, I don't know how you get that message out, but I just think that's important, that the employees here can deliver that to whoever will listen, you know, public service groups, whoever, you know, the fire board needs to understand, we're against the rock here. So,
Yeah, I think one encouraging thing is the fact that this time around, we have the means to publish this, in essence, on our website, you know, make it a public document. We haven't done that in the past, and I think it's, you know, following the path of our neighbors, you know, most of them have their plans where the public can see it and touch it and understand it. So that creates awareness, and as we move
Well,
forward.
we should have someplace to direct them to.
Exactly. Yep. I did want to, just real quick, if I could just say thank you, one to the board for your patience with this process. It's been a labor of love, and think we again have a good product at the end. I also want to thank staff. Bob's not here anymore, but he was a huge part of this, as you know, and kind of his magnum opus, so to speak, before he headed off into the happy lands of retirement. So, and then other staff, our engineering group did a heck of a job providing information, water resources, our distribution group, and also Carollo engineers for their very professional managing and assisting us through this process. So, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you.
I'll call the question.
Yeah, no,
Wait, we have.
we have somebody who also wants to comment.
Oh,
I signed didn't see you back there.
Gary Kerr, ratepayer and budget committee member. I've gone through this several times. I'm grateful for the fact that this time we chose to have the staff do the primary work. They're familiar with the system and generally speaking, are better able to put together what the real needs are without the fluff that comes from the outside people before. So I appreciate that and compliment them on putting together what I think is a better plan than I've ever seen here. Problem is that this is the first one in 20 years that really has been thorough. So I'm also glad that we know more fully what really exists as opposed to what speculation has been in the past, because it's, as mentioned earlier, it's a long-term plan and requires long-term planning on the part of staff, management, and the board to see how to fund this. There's three problems, however, that I see that are integrated with this. And the first problem is the rate model. Based on what is here, the rate model will not provide the funds. And the reason is the people have the money, number one. Number two, we're having an aging population and they're becoming on fixed incomes. So what happens is the rates go up, the volumetric portion of the rate goes down. And we've seen that in the last 7 to 10 years. The volumetric rate has gone down, there's net bigger growth. And we're facing some other issues that we have to be cognizant of on a year-to-year basis, on a budgeting basis, to make sure we don't get further behind, as Dave has mentioned, that we already are. The old structure is going to have to be replaced. 90-year-old pipes don't last 200 years. And those will have to be replaced, and engineering can tell you which ones those are and put them in properly in the CIP. We have the problem with Oregon City with the Beaver Creek concept plan. At least when I saw it, shows a stub road right at the end of the golf course where the grade school is going to go. They put all those homes in that Beaver Creek concept plan. That currently is the UGB line. Whether or not the city will get the UGB line moved is another issue. Oregon City would then want to do that. The annexation rules we have to watch because no longer are votes required for annexation. And so somewhere, if we're watching the growth of Oregon City in the south, particularly, and a little bit in Happy Valley, we need to monitor those annexations more carefully than I think we have in the past, because that has the possibility of consuming customers. Also has the possibility of changing agreements we already have with Oregon City, because Oregon City doesn't have the capacity to serve some of that area. There's already a problem with a 3-story building in one of those spots on the Beaver Creek plan, and they're gonna have to put pumps in because Oregon City doesn't have the pressure to get it for. So somewhere, coordination between us and Oregon City and those areas that they're building up and their potential for annexation, we need to watch more carefully than we have in the past. And so I would urge the board and the staff to look at those things in all of the areas as we go forward with this plan, to see that it's done in an orderly manner. And that when the changes come from the staff for the budget process, that the movement of those projects as they're currently listed will be more carefully explained than historically has been done. So that the board really has a picture of why they've taken one that was scheduled for 2029 and why it ended up being on 2022's budget. Okay? Because that throws off the cash flow. It also throws off the rate model. And you're going to be doing the rate model in a couple of years. And so there's going to have to be some careful planning, in my view, with regard to the master plan, for which we don't have total money available, and how that's going to affect rates as they put together the rate model. So that's my comments. Appreciate their work.
Did you attend the last Beaver Creek concept planning meeting?
I didn't get there, but I got a copy of some of what was done.
So it was quite remarkable in that the city lost the lawsuit from Evergreen.
Yeah, I know.
So what that did is it threw their whole plan into absolutely, put it on its head. So they don't have to build that 5-lane section on the road.
I know, that's a problem.
They don't have to extend the sewers any farther than their frontage. And they don't have to make all those improvements that are in the current SDCs. And so it's going to completely change what they can do for transportation, sewer, water, everything, because now somebody is going to have to pick up all of those costs if they want to maintain the plan that they had prior to that decision. And so it's going to change significantly, perhaps, and certainly the timing of that project. And so I'll be anxious to see what happens at the next meeting, because they were absolutely in shambles trying to figure out what to do with that.
That's very important to monitor, because everything in the Leland Road area south of Oregon City and the South End Road, or section of Oregon City where we had pipes, okay, in the nursery that I mentioned earlier, the city forced the developers to put parallel pipes where we already had sufficient quantity and ability to serve them. They forced them to put the pipes in, and nobody knew that. And that went into the cost of the project, but, you know, the water was already there. So I don't know what they're gonna do about that particular problem. The developers, if they're sufficiently well-heeled, will put some of that in. That'll increase the cost of the projects, the homes in there. I looked at the tax map yesterday, or Saturday, and there are already post office numbers on all those lots. So that tells me that the developer, at least at whatever point they went to the post office, was assured to do the building, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten hundreds of post office addresses for the various lots.
So Evergreens keep their permit alive, so they can go to construction anytime they want.
Yep, that's my view.
Yeah, that's what they told us.
So, anyway, those are the kind of things that I think, particularly in the south area, we're gonna have to really monitor more carefully than we have historically. And with the new agreement with Oregon City, that may help us. But we already know the pressures from Oregon City in that area, as I understand, and they'll not be able to serve much of that if it gets too big, and they can't serve the third floor anyway.
Especially when they said they would allow 6-story buildings.
That's right. So, anyway, just to call that to the board's attention, and again, appreciate what the staff has done. I know that they've done a lot of hard work, and I'm more comfortable with this master plan than any of the others I've previously seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? On this master plan? Okay. Action item number 2.
No,
We need to
Oh,
vote.
that's right. Yes. You went on so long.
Wake up, you.
Commissioner Anger?
Yes.
Commissioner French?
Yes.
Commissioner Garrison?
Yes.
Commissioner Kalani?
Yes.
Commissioner McNeil?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Nice job, Adam.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, action item number 2, I'll go ahead and move that the board accept the easement at Alder Creek Middle School on TL 700, map 2S, 2E, 5CB, in the amount of, it says 0. And authorize the general manager to sign the easement documents.
Second.
Second motion.
I want to know what the contingency is on this, Bill.
Yeah,
So why is it 0?
because they are nice to us.
Oh, okay.
This is a project that has been on the capital outlay budget for this last biennium. And when we started moving forward on trying to find a meter replacement, that's the original purpose for this, we found that the school was doing a remodel job. And so we went to visit them and found a bunch of deficiencies, one of which was the way they were providing backflow prevention within the school grounds. They had backflow prevention in the building for the boilers and other fire systems, but it was dislocated from the meter. The meter is old and there's no replacement parts. It's an old vault. It's half in the street and half out the street. And that was one of the driving forces for replacing this. There's no replacement parts. And the consultant was having trouble calibrating it to get it to read correctly. So we have a number of these and they're identified for replacement every year. And we just systematically replace these old meters. Well, in the course of Discovery, while they were doing the remodel last summer, we told them that they needed to upgrade their backflow device. And so what they did is they put their backflow device right where we wanted to put our new meter. And I worked with the engineer and the instructor in order to site that. I contacted the county and found out what the ultimate configuration of what the road would be. And so we didn't want to be in a position where 20 years down the road we'd have to move the meter again, nor their backflow device. And so we found a place for their backflow device. Our meter goes right next to that backflow device. It requires us to put in a little bit of piping in order to get to it. But this easement that they donated is adjacent to the right-of-way. The meter vault is located outside what the future corridor would be. And we didn't have to take any trees out. And this is the end result of months of working with the school district in order to site this on their property rather than in the right-of-way, which would be in danger of future improvement.
Future corridor meaning future roadway? Or,
The widening of a roadway. So what we
Yeah.
have is a paved road. It has curb on one side, opposite the school, but there is no curb on the school side.
exactly.
And so we looked at the classification of the roadway, asked them what their future intent was, crystal ball as best they could. And so we moved it as far away as we could. They may need to put a retaining wall in at the back of the sidewalk when they actually do widen it and those trees go away. But we won't have to move our wall.
You're out of the way, okay, good. Thank you.
Any questions?
Commissioner Andrew?
Yes.
Commissioner French?
Yes.
Commissioner Garrison?
Yes.
Commissioner Kalani?
Yes.
Commissioner McNeil?
Yeah.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Well, you're gonna be coming right back up.
So, if I may interrupt, on item 3, we realized it was a notice issue.
I was gonna say, I don't think we have noticed this.
Well, it's been posted, but, and then everybody would have received the packet and stuff, but unfortunately, the agenda item itself had reverted back to the old version, so we're gonna hold this over till tomorrow.
Okay.
We don't have to go.
They need to close.
Adjourn.
They need to adjourn.
Yeah, we need to adjourn and get into
Adjourn-
work
Yeah, we
session.
have to adjourn and go into the work session.
What?
Special meeting, and go to the work session.
Okay, I thought.
You go after you do the.
Okay, we adjourned the regular meeting.